Hi everyone, I'm Claire and I'm the CEO of Know Your Company, and I'm really excited today to have a special guest with me, Traynor, the founder of Intercom. And Des is someone who I've gotten to know over the past few years. We've spoken at a few of the same conferences, and I've always been blown away, to be frank, Des, by some of the insights that you've shared around product, around growing teams. It's always so interesting to learn from you, so really grateful to have you here today and to ask you one question around leadership.
Well, it's cool to be here. I've been a fan of you, your talks, and your company for quite a while, so I'm excited to be here.
Thanks so much, Des. Appreciate that. So here's the thing. Here's the one question I'm going to ask you, which is, what's something you wish you would have learned earlier as a leader?
Yeah. God, I mean, there are so many. Do I have to pick one, or?
You can pick as many as you want. You can start going through the list, and I'll cut you off when I feel like it's too much. Or
Okay. Okay. Maybe I'll do that. I'll go through the list. You can just move me on as a big boring. Okay. I guess something I try to talk to people a lot about is like the importance of being clear and honest in communication. And I think that often goes directly at odds with the social skill of being likable. And I think as a leader, I think you have to understand that your job isn't to leave a room with everyone thinking you're a swell person who they really want to hang with and go for beers with. If someone has done great work, they should feel great about after talking to you about it. And similarly, if someone hasn't done great work, they shouldn't feel you shouldn't optimize for your own perception when you're sharing feedback. You should optimize for the clear, right feedback that helps the person advance in their career. And I think there's a real silent cost to being nice, and I think this is part of the whole radical candor.
Yes.
Sort of idea. But I think there's a danger that people adopt. They apply the same skills they use in social dynamics when they're at a cocktail party to management. And I think I learned very early on in my career that my job isn't to be really popular. My job is to be really honest and fair and treat people with the respect and they deserve and give them the feedback that they need to improve in their career. I think that for me is something that most people who find themselves in a leadership position early. And by the way, this is such in startups, because startups grow so quickly that before you know it, you have a team of 6 reporting to you, and you never asked for this, but now it's happened or whatever.
Right.
I think there is a silent cost to optimizing for being nice, and I think you really need to think about that as a leader. That's probably my first one. I think it's the one that maybe bites you earlier in your career.
Right. Is it something that you remember? Was there anything that happened where you're like, oh my God, I never imagined myself sort of optimizing for nice, but here I am. I mean, you're a nice guy. Let's be real, right? You're a good person, right? We, most people I would like to say are. But was there a moment where you're just wow, I think I'm actually sort of wanting to be liked by my team more than I am trying to make the right decisions here?
I think the moment for me came when I remember going into a meeting and having where I had to just share feedback to somebody, and it wasn't even particularly bad. Yeah. It was just hey, here's a couple of, at the time it was customer support, and it was a couple of conversations that just could have gone better. Yeah. And I just wanted to let the person know that there is a standard, and on these couple of occasions you didn't hit it, and I want to talk about why. But I wrote down my honest thoughts before I went into the meeting. I went in and I had the meeting, and then I came back and my notepad was still open on my screen, and I sat down. I replayed the conversation in my head of the words I had said, and I looked at the difference in the words I'd written down. And what I'd written down was not acceptable standard. Understand why it might have happened. Let's talk about the scenario with which all this played out. But I need to be clear from my end that we can't treat our customers like this. It needs to be higher quality. We need to be more compassionate, more empathetic with the customer, etc. Right? But then I thought about the meeting, and I was like, hey, look, you're doing awesome. There's just a couple of little things that and how quickly I had degraded the message in order to make it a nice, easy conversation for me. Right?
Yes.
And because I wasn't thinking about them, I was genuinely thinking how do I make this an easy Tuesday afternoon chat? And when that realization hit home, as I kind of reread my notes, I was like, I am fucking this up. So can I first?
No, you're good. I can so relate. I can so relate. Like, I think sometimes we unintentionally dilute a message without, almost subconsciously, right? Almost subconsciously, just because I think a lot of, it's human instinct, we fear the reaction, right? We're trying to control for the reaction. So we sort of bend the words a little bit. We, do the shit sandwich, so to speak, where, you're giving the compliments, right, around the shit because you're like, oh, I just got to say the good stuff just so that person feels good. And you're so right, it's dangerous because, I mean, what did that teammate walk away with? They probably thought, oh, I'm doing okay.
How could they have walked away anything other than, I'm mostly doing good and I slipped up a couple times, but it seems like that's fine.
Right.
That's literally the message I gave.
Right.
Nearly a 180 to what was on my screen.
Right.
So that was one. I guess, like, another thing that comes up a lot is, like, that I think about a lot, is like transparency, right? And how it's such a double-edged sword. I think,
yes.
Specifically there's been like a lot of movement towards the transparent company. Like, let's share everything with everyone in the team. And like, there's a lot of good quotes and good arguments that support this, which is like, if you want your team to behave the way you would behave, they need access to the same information that you have. And I think that's generally true. I 100% agree with that. The piece I think people forget in transparency is it's not about like opening up the Google Drive and making sure that everyone can read everything. It's about like transparency of context as well. As in, I find myself constantly sort of saying like, here's a piece of information, and then here is a shitload of context you need to understand why that piece of information is interesting.
Yes.
And there's some stuff where the cost of the size of the context. And it could be anything. It could be like, well, in order to understand this, you first of all need to understand the theory of disruptive innovation. So let me start there, right?
Yeah.
In those cases, it's like, it's genuinely, I'm not saying like that, like, transparency is bad, but I think transparency where it causes more confusion than it resolves is risky. And where it causes more like, where it makes people want to ask more questions rather than answering questions. You need to sort of think about this, and like that's why I think with sort of sharing nuggets of information, whether it's a spreadsheet or whatever, if you're going to leave people either misinterpreting or just frankly lost for interpretation, you need to think about like whether that was a fully transparent thing to do. Like, in some sense, no company is 100% transparent, because
of course,
like for that to happen, every time you go for a walk with somebody, you have to write up the conversation you had and share it with the entire, there's obviously always transparency is some sort of spectrum, right? But I think one thing that people over engineer for is let's let everyone have access to absolutely everything and somehow magically assume that they're going to understand it all and how we think about everything all the time, and that's just not how it works, unfortunately. So I think that's like understanding that transparency is a spectrum. Some areas where it's really ROI positive, so all of our product ideas, all of our product strategy, etc. You want everyone in the company to understand that, so they can make the smartest local decisions. Random stuff like how we think about a new market for us, or like how much we pay our PR agency or something like that. Like, it's just, in order to understand, you have to kind of provide all this other stuff such that the message becomes really just a waste of time in terms of the value of everyone knowing.
Sure.
Okay. I think like it's worth having sort of a critical sort of threshold to decide what's actually good for everyone to know, what's not a secret but needs context, and what actually then genuinely might be a secret, as in you don't want everyone panicking about something or whatever. Understanding that transparency is a spectrum is something that, as a leader, I think you kind of need to get your head around pretty quickly.
Yeah, I also could not agree more with that, and I think it's I think it runs, honestly, like you were saying, counter to a very popular idea these days, which is just open up everything. Which, again, in theory, I mean, I run Know Your Company, right? It's like, oh yeah, of course, like transparency is good, but I could not agree more that transparency is only useful with meaning assigned to it, right? And like you were saying, in context.
Yes.
And so it's a lot for a leader, I think, also to be very conscious about how they invest in training folks and giving that context. And like you said, where is it appropriate? And honestly, in what cases is it distracting? Like, I personally can only handle so much information in a day. Like, I don't want to know the details of every single little thing that's happening on support. I don't want to know the details on every single thing that's running on product. Like, I would go insane. So at some point, it's the same way as, to what extent, as a leader, and this is what you have to decide, is that information useful? Do we invest in providing that context? And what point is it actually distracting? So I think that's very, very spot on.
Do I have time for one more? Or
go for it, Des. I was just about to say, I'm not going to cut you off yet. These are all so good. Let's hear the last one.
Yeah. Okay. This is my last one because I have a meeting for it after. I think something that wasn't obvious to me until maybe like year 2 or year 3 was the importance of consistency in who you are and how you lead and your behavior in general. And I think I always thought like like I was like, you have this attitude of like, oh, consistency means boring, it means repetitive, it means all that sort of stuff. It also genuinely means like calmness and predictability and means that you're easy to interpret and easy to predict by your team, which means that like if you consistently behave in a certain way, people can preempt and predict what you're likely to do. Your team and as a result, they know how to act as if you weren't there, which is a really valuable thing. And I think like there's this quote that people fall in love with, which is something like, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of a simple mind, is the quote I often hear back at me when I talk about consistency. And I think the key there is foolish consistency, is in it's consistency where you've got new information, you should be acting differently, but you're still doing the same thing. But in general, like one example of this I see all the time is like people who apply like what I call like temporal standard. So that is, some projects they jump into and some projects they stay out of. Some people they go hard on and some people they go easy on.
Yes.
So some things they're busy about, some things they're quiet about. It becomes quite chaotic because people never know where they stand with relation to anything. So I think like, having a sort of set of principles and having a set of like, here are the things I really care about when you share work with me, and I will always give you feedback along these sort of lines. And here are the things that I frankly don't care about unless it crosses some crazy threshold. I think like doing it, but it's so important to do it consistently. It takes a lot of discipline to like, I will always point out a typo in a blog headline or something like that, right? I'll never be like that's okay. Right. So like, and it's like, but making that consistency always being a thing, people learn, and they learn how to sort of work with the standard you set. Yes. There's a quote by some Australian military person who said like, the standard you walk past is the standard you tolerate. Yeah. I think that's why it has to be consistent. You can't opportunistically say, oh, we have to do a really good job here, but this thing over here can be shit. So like I really felt that like it's forced a greater discipline and sort of basic sort of leadership hygiene on me to sort of know that like I actually don't get to pick and choose. Like you're doing your job all the time, not just the times you show up when you're excited. You're doing your job all of the time. And when your job is leading, you're basically setting a precedent for acceptable and expected behavior, which means every single negative thing you do, every bad behavior you have, you're basically saying, you're admitting that you think that's acceptable. Yes. So you really need to get it together, Oh
my gosh. That's an amazing sort of nugget there, Des, because I think what you're also talking about is how a leader sets the culture, right? Because at the end of the day, culture is just the byproduct of consistent actions, behaviors, and beliefs, right? And so without that consistency, then your culture becomes amorphous. It becomes this thing that gets shaped, by external factors or just sort of by a whim of what happens to be going on in the moment. And a lot of people, they'll approach me and talk about, well, yeah, Claire, how do you shift culture? How do you actually get a culture to be open and honest? And my answer is always, well, it's always the consistent behavior first and foremost from the leader. It starts there. And like you were saying, if they, if she or he is setting the standard for, when someone has a dissenting opinion, I don't yell at them in front of my team. I actually thank them. And I tell them, you know what, I disagree with you, but I love that you brought that up, right? That sets the expectation then for that next person to come up to you and bring that viewpoint. And without that consistency, just as you were saying, then that culture doesn't exist, it doesn't grow. So that's, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Well, that's it. I'm done at 3. I can keep going.
Oh my gosh, what? I was about to say, I'm going to have to come back to you for more because, wow, I'm blown away. I think so many of the folks who follow along with this will really appreciate you sharing all that. Thanks so much for your time. Really enjoyed having you here, Des.
Pleasure, Claire. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Of course. All right, talk soon. See ya.